Hey,
Hey,
do you
Mark.
prefer that I keep my camera on or does it matter?
Um, it doesn't actually matter, because I've got a toggle. You probably do too, but you can toggle if you're actually on the screen or not. So right now, neither of us are. I was gonna toggle myself on in a second here.
Yeah, cool, man. We should have 40 people or 40
Okay.
people have registered as of this morning. We got a few people from or a few customers from Cyber Advisors. I
Okay.
actually have a running list of that.
Okay. I did another dry run last night. I cut like another 6 slides out. I'm I'm a little hoarse because of all the talking that I've been doing, which is we'll see if I can make it through. I'm probably going to be crawling at the very end. Um,
Are you gonna stick with the same format as last time as far as like Q&A at the end? I thought that was very helpful.
I
I thought that was
yeah,
good.
I'm gonna try. Like I said, I've been like right at that hour mark, which is why I cut out like one of my demos and a whole bunch of other slides just so I had a little bit of time because I know this was only slated for half an hour, but this is probably going to be at least 50 minutes, 45, 50 minutes for sure.
Got it.
So it's uh, in hindsight, I was nervous that I was going to have enough content. I
Over.
should have I should have just split this out into 3 different sections itself. So it's fine. I've This is a bit more of a deeper dive than I don't know. Um, Last session was a high level. This is going to be a little bit more in the weeds, even though I tried to reel myself in from that, but after going
I,
through it with Audrey last night, she's like, "Oh yeah, you went off the deep end on some," which is why I cut a few slides out that are just too much.
gotcha.
So, see. Mm. I'm projecting. You see the slideshow, right? The
Yep, I
screen.
am. I'll be the one in charge of admitting everyone. So I see there's already 3 people on. So are you good that I start this? Or at least
Uh,
start bringing in people and you don't necessarily have to start.
yeah, that's fine.
All right, I'm gonna mute myself here.
Hey, folks. I'm gonna give everyone just a couple of minutes. I'm sure we'll get a bunch of people joining here. So we'll get started probably 11:02, 11:03. All right. So we'll get started. Mark's gonna help me invite or add people as they continue to join. But we'll kick things off. There's a lot of content to cover. Just an FYI, I know this meeting shows 30 minutes. I did my best to keep it within that, but doing a couple of dry runs last night with my lovely wife, found out that I'm well over hours. So just a heads up to everyone, we will be providing the PowerPoint deck and the video of this on our website. So if you have to drop off early, you can still catch the rest of it if, or in fact, I do go over the 30-minute time frame. But we'll kick things off. So welcome everyone. My name's Andrew Klemek. I'm with Cyber Advisors. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with Cyber Advisors, I'll give you just a brief synopsis. So we help provide customized professional IT and security solutions to well over 3,000 clients. We operate out of our headquarters in Maple Grove with 2 additional offices in Burnsville and Fargo, as well as remote workers in 20 plus states at this point, kind of serving everything from the SMB, mid-market, enterprise clients across the country. So we offer everything from managed services, security services like offensive, defensive compliance management, networking, as well as modern work, cloud and modern work, advisory, implementations, migrations. So I help lead our cloud and modern work practice. I've been here for well over a decade at this point, and working very closely with a number of different Microsoft and cloud-centric capabilities. So prior to my days working here, consulting-wise, I did work with Microsoft for a number of years on various cloud divisions that they have, actually prior to their cloud divisions. So before Office 365, there was a less catchy term called Business Online Productivity Suite, or BPOS for short, that as Microsoft was initially trying to roll out what it is today, that cloud-centric ecosystem for organizations to use and build on. So even though then it was in its infancy and there was definitely less security, less feature rich than what it is today, they've been constantly adding to it. And so today, I really just kind of want to go through and provide you guys with a better sense of what security and governance controls actually exist within your Microsoft 365. So a brief agenda today. We'll kind of go through Purview information protection, data loss prevention, and insider risk management to kind of go through the different security features, capabilities that you can leverage to secure your environment, protect user identities, protect your data. So we'll take a bit deeper dive than we did in last month's section, going into each one of these to kind of show you the nuts and bolts of how they actually work. So what does it mean to understand your data or to discover your sensitive data? So a looming challenge that organizations are facing is that as they continue to grow, their data and the ability to be able to protect that data or govern that data effectively is changing. So data, as most organizations can likely agree, is that it's become kind of the lifeblood of most businesses. It's projected that the amount of data, the data sphere globally, is going to double from now to 2026. So there's a lot of data, data's everywhere, and it's exponentially growing. So today, data usage has moved beyond just the traditional borders of business. It's being stored on premise, multiple clouds, on devices, mobile devices, Androids, iPhone, and accessed from within and outside corporate networks. And most businesses, they're adopting kind of multiple cloud infrastructures, platforms, services to run their business. And with that growth in data security incidents are becoming very widespread. And insiders, which we'll talk about in a second, are becoming a big part of these incidents. And it's costing organizations tons of money every year to be able to resolve and remediate effectively. So to ensure you're protecting your data, you need to understand your data specifically, how it's being used, and how it's being accessed within your environment. then applying these classifications and preventative rules help to allow you to protect your data from unauthorized or malicious actions. And then finally, we're getting to a state at the end of being able to govern and retain the data based on any of the requirements, obligations, or parameters that we're setting. So, as organizations think about protecting their most important asset, their data, they ultimately need to create a defense in depth approach. Common security term, but it's essentially kind of these three components to the strategy. And it's important to keep in mind that you don't need to use these three areas in any particular order. This strategy can be tailored to your own organization's unique needs. And you may start with one and you may grow into insider risk or information protection or data loss prevention. Maybe you use a couple of these and you may not use like insider risk. So let's start with kind of protecting your sensitive data. So it's important to understand and discover the sensitive data within your organization, and you need solutions to be able to provide that visibility into your data estate, whether it's cloud, a hybrid solution, or on-premise. And then data doesn't move itself. We understand that most of the time people move the data. And with all the data in the organization, you need to understand the user context and intent of the data to effectively protect it with the right policies in place. So the next layer of defense takes into account the user context to identify potential data, enabling security teams to quickly take mitigating actions. Since data loss is usually caused by internal actors, which again we'll get to in a second, organizations need to take a holistic approach to managing insider risk, which brings together the right people, processes, training, and tools. And then the last layer of defense that Microsoft has created is the approach to prevent data loss or unauthorized use of data. So most organizations don't feel confident they can detect or prevent the loss of sensitive data, and organizations need a way to balance that protection with productivity without compromising either. And it's critical to critical to set preventative actions like improperly saving, storing, or printing sensitive data within the organization, so data is not accidentally or maliciously exfiltrated outside of the organization. And it doesn't matter where you embark on this journey, so each layer makes your data security stronger. So build out what's most critical to you right now as you look to develop your long-term strategy. These components create an integrated, kind of holistic data security strategy, helping you to keep your organization's data safe wherever it lives. So before we get into each solution individually, let's make it real and show you some common scenarios, because there's a lot of complexity that we just discussed, and data security incidents can happen at any time, anywhere, to anyone. First, when organizations don't have the visibility into their data, data is at risk of misuse. It's like if you have your garage filled with a whole bunch of stuff. You don't always have the visibility into all of your things. So there's a greater chance that if someone took something out of your garage that you wouldn't even notice, or it would take you some time to notice before that things may have been stolen. So data security incidents can be caused by a few different factors. First of which is an external factor. And this is the one that most organizations are actually aware of. An example of this is a user falls prey to a phishing email and their account was compromised. And then subsequently, that compromised account stole or exposed sensitive data. Then you've got the internal factors. And these are carried out by the insiders that we talked about. And there's three different scenarios for internal risks. You've got data theft, which is malicious insiders stealing data for personal gain. An example of this is a departing employee stole, intellectual or IP property, and then took it with them to the next employer or such as a client contact list. This may happen if they email the data to their private email address, if they try to print it, perhaps just transferring it to a flash drive. The next is a data leak, where negligent users accidentally overexpose data or applications they're working on that may have had confidential information. And then finally, the third internal risk is where a disgruntled employee may actually sabotage corporate data. If they're frustrated, they may go in, delete information before that individual leaves or is possibly terminated from the organization. So there's multiple different ways that you need to actually take preventative actions against these items. So organizations need to discover and classify their data at scale, safeguard the data throughout its entire life cycle, extend the data labeling and protection experience across their organization, and understand the user intent and context around the sensitive data to identify their most critical risks. So let's go through the Microsoft Purview solution. Again, the data loss prevention, insider risk management, and information protection is where we're going to focus on today as we kind of quickly run through ways that we can protect and enhance our data security capabilities. So data security includes information protection, which is a solution that's designed to help organizations secure their data across the data estate, regardless of where it resides. We touched on this in last month's webinar, and we'll go through this first here so you understand and have a better idea of what it means to actually protect your information, how you actually go about classifying your sensitive data versus public data, and how you can go about weaving that into your organization and still keeping your users productive but secure at the end of the day. And then next, we'll discuss data loss prevention, which is a critical component, and it's designed to help organizations protect the sensitive data, regardless of where it lives, but being able to apply policies and protections, preventative measures, like its name suggests, to make sure that data doesn't fall into the wrong hands. And then finally, insider risk management, which allows organizations to minimize internal risks. So again, most organizations understand that external risk, but those internal risks are ones that are just as important to organizations, and being able to proactively take a defensive stance against those can really protect your data and your users at the end of the day. So starting off with information protection. This is allowing you to protect everything from email, Teams, SharePoint, OneDrive, Power BI, on-premise file servers, etc. And it's allowing us to basically categorize the data using its classification service. And we'll touch on what all these are in just a second. So what we're doing is going to define a label taxonomy within the labeling service. And this allows you to either automatically detect sensitive information or having users manually do so by applying their own labels based on the sensitivity of the data of the document that they're utilizing. That way, confidential labeling is going to be more secure, may use encryption policies than what a general label policy was. And a general labeling policy is going to have more sensitivity applied to it than if a public label. You may have noticed at the start of this presentation, my slide deck was, marked for public viewing. If it was sensitive, I wouldn't be able to share this out. If it was confidential, that means it would be restricted to maybe only Mark and myself and no one else. So being able to understand like the data that you have and where its use cases need to exist, as well as what information that you do need to protect within those documents is going to be key. And this is where that rights management service comes in. This is basically the underlying layer that's been around with 365 for a very long time. And Microsoft's using that to provide encryption to your labeling policies, to your data classification services, and throughout all of your applications. And this means not just your cloud services, but where the data goes. If you have a document that goes into, Box or Dropbox or WebEx or ShareFile, you still want to be able to protect it. And how do you do so? You're protecting it within the document itself. And so regardless of where that document goes, those protection mechanisms follow that document. That way, this can be very useful if you have users uploading information, maybe unknowingly, that is sensitive into a cloud, like a third-party application that may have very loose terms of service agreements defined that may allow them to read the information in those documents and use them within their, their LLM, their large language model service. And a lot of organizations don't want that. But how do you go about, actually protecting and safeguarding not just your users from doing that inadvertently or negligently, but how can you keep that sensitive data under your organization's hold? So this is where we start getting into the classification technologies to better understand and identify the sensitive data, how it's identified, labeled, and protected across various platforms and environments. So starting off, a sensitive information type, or SIT, as we call it, is anything that's identifiable or predefined. So this is items like drivers, ID numbers, driver's license, social security numbers, banking information, and more. Named entities are used to identify persons, addresses, medical terms, conditions, such as drug names. These help you accurately detect like regulatory or compliance related data. And EDM, or exact data match, is the next technique that provides a lookup to match content with unique customer data like product codes or healthcare records. And then we have OCR, which is an optical character recognition. So it supports a ton of different languages. And what it's doing is actually extracting text and information from those images automatically, if there's images in PDFs, documents, and still being able to apply those sensitive policies. And there's some caveats with OCR that we'll get to in just a second, so you understand that there are still some limitations, but they're building around it. Then you have trainable classifiers, which allow you to choose from over 40 pre-trained models. And these are basically ready to use out of the box. You can quickly identify the sensitive data in different business categories in your organization, where customers can then build their own trainable classifiers if they have like proprietary or intellectual property that they want to be able to protect that may not be out of the box. Credentialed sensitive information types can be used to detect digital authentication strings. So you could think of this as passwords, Azure connection strings, storage keys, and these can be identified in chats, emails, documents. So if you really wanted to find out who's storing passwords, in a document or in email, who's transferring passwords in chat, a credential set is something that it would look for. Oops. Fingerprinting is an exact or partial match of sensitive intellectual property. So it can be a standard information type, which you can use within the DLP rules to basically match on certain like formulas or data that's specific to your organization. And then finally, the content-based classification, where we're not looking at the data itself, but we're looking at the properties of those files, file extension, specific names for documents, sizes, document sizes that are larger or smaller than certain values. So after that, after we've identified our sensitive information types, we need to be able to define our labeled taxonomy. And what this is, it's a structured system used to categorize and organize information based on sensitivity and confidentiality levels. So this just refers to the hierarchy of sensitive labels that represent your organization's information and prioritizes them based on the assignment that you give to each type of category. So for example here, public is information that can be freely shared with anyone. General, maybe like a internal business use case that is sensitive and should be kept internal or used with discretion. Confidential is oftentimes sensitive information that should only be shared with specific individuals. And then you have restricted, where highly sensitive information that requires strict access controls and often a predefined list of authorized users. And this taxonomy helps to ensure that the data is consistently classified and protected according to its sensitivity level, making it easier to manage and secure across the organization. So organizations can dictate which users are allowed to use specific labels and whether they're also allowed to downgrade these labels from one sensitivity to another. An example here is there may be a business use case where you have a general document that a user then needs to share with an external client or contact. Once they've verified that there's no sensitive information that remains in the updated document, they can downgrade that label to public and then freely share the document externally. If the user misses, say, potential sensitive information in that, this is where you can have additional measures such as data loss prevention to accidentally prevent that data from going out that still may be sensitive. You can also do automatic labeling. And in a nutshell, what this allows you the ability to set on different teams, sites, folders, including on-premise file shares, um, automatic labeling of certain values. So you can think of a file share, and if you have an HR or accounting or finance, oftentimes not everyone in the organization is going to be able to see that information or should have access to that. And if you're concerned that you may not have proper permissions and policies set up, either within your SharePoint site or on-prem file servers, you can use label classification to increase the sensitivity and who has visibility into it by automatically assigning specific sensitivity labels to entire folders or entire sites automatically. So here's a few guiding principles when applying labels. When content is created or accessed, set the default label. Typically, this is a public or sensitive document, unless there's a specific location where the known document should have a higher sensitivity or require restrictions for specific types of data extensions or perhaps file sizes. And then finally, apply automatic labeling based on any of the context situations that we just discussed, such as locations, emails, or on-premise file repositories. Next, there's been a lot of new items that Microsoft has come out with over the past year. And I just wanted to mention to the organization, so everyone has a better idea of the new items that they've recently put in over the past few months. They've expanded auto labeling to now Azure Storage, Amazon Web Services, their S3 storage, as well as Azure SQL Services, the software as a service databases, meaning you can auto label different storage accounts, whether it's in Azure or Amazon. They've also applied both information protection and DLP capabilities to not just Power BI, but also Microsoft Fabric. And they've extended permissions within SharePoint that allow you the ability to add or remove users within a restricted site or library and have it apply permissions based on those label policies. So this helps to simplify who can or cannot access sensitive data or data locations without the need of involving IT or a compliance admin to make these changes for you. And then they also added additional capabilities within Teams meetings for labeling recordings or transcriptions, as well as automatically labeling meetings based on the sensitivity if documents are shared or displayed in those meetings. And finally, the OCR that I mentioned, so the optical character recognition, it supports workloads within documents and files. Note that it is using the Microsoft syntax, or that's what we'll be rolling out across DLP information protection and cyber risks. Currently, a lot of it is still the Azure OCR, and that's not fully integrated within the Microsoft 365 stack. So there are some limitations. It can be set up now, but know that it's a little bit involved and that they are making an easier pathway if you have OCR based images with sensitive data that you want to be able to protect. So let's take an example of what we just went through with information protection. So John's leading a team and is working on a top secret program called Project Obsidian that only a few people at Contoso know about. Alice is a project manager and hears about Project Obsidian. And since she doesn't necessarily work on the project and no one shared relevant files with her, she may be curious. And so she could search their SharePoint site and potentially pull if that's where Project Obsidian files were stored, if permissions were not set correctly. So she does that. She finds some files and maybe she wants to draw insights from the Project Obsidian files that she finds. So she can copy and paste and upload that into something like ChatGPT and ask it to summarize that for her. So all of a sudden, without realizing that Alice may have put sensitive information or sensitive content about that project in jeopardy, because now that content is public and it's part of ChatGPT's training data. So why was this able to happen? And there's a couple of issues at fault here. Contoso as an organization may not have had robust hygiene practices as it relates to data. John may not have set up proper access for the Project Obsidian documents and left it with open permissions for Alice to find. Additionally, Contoso may not have had an auto labeling policy set up that could have automatically labeled the project documents that are being worked on to securely and protect them for only authorized users. Contoso may also not have had DLP policies, which could have blocked actions such as pasting content into a consumer generative AI solution, such as ChatGPT. So because Contoso had poor hygiene, the information about the project was able to get out into the world, which could result in bad PR or significant impact to the organization. So this brings us into the next section. How do we prevent that data loss? So DLP is a label classification and is providing the ability to basically prevent access either from the data, how it's being used, or accidentally exposing it. And this is where DLP comes into the picture to help prevent the information from being overshared. So organizations need to understand the hidden risks of their data, and this starts with getting visibility into what data you have, where it's located, and how users are interacting with the data. What activities are happening within the organization, and without this visibility, you'll not be able to effectively protect the data. So once you have that visibility into the data risk, you can implement multiple layers of control, and you need to combine the context with the user context so that you can create effective data loss prevention policies across your landscape. And remember, there's no one size fits all when it comes to data loss prevention policies. Oftentimes, I hear that individuals at organizations will scope their policies to try to include most of the users. Sounds like a good idea, but oftentimes there's use cases, and grouping everyone in often leads to the inability to proactively prevent data loss or exposure. A marketing person doesn't necessarily need to have the same restrictions as someone from HR that is dealing with sensitive, PII, potentially, HIPAA or PHI data. And so having them grouped together with the same rules does not make for an effective strategy. And it prevents the organization from really being proactive and keeps them in a reactionary stage. And then finally, if or when a data security incident happens, you need to be able to quickly investigate and remediate the incident and put policies in place to prevent these actions from happening in the future. So once you know your data, you can establish the protection plan to address the risk of accidental exposure or inappropriate sharing. And as part of this solution, DLP allows a consistent set of policies across emails, files, SharePoint, Power BI, and is continuously growing. So what you need to do is identify what you want to monitor, such as personally identifiable information, identify where you want to monitor for this data. And this could be an email, a document, SharePoint that we talked about. It could also be on a laptop or on a file server. Then configure the conditions you want to match the policy to be applied. So this may mean that if an alert is generated, if sensitive information is emailed to an external user, someone's going to get notified about that. Or it may mean we have a block policy in place that prevents the user from being, that prevents the data from being sent. So this would be the action plan that is executed when those conditions are met. So how do we help set those conditions? So what Microsoft has is templates, and these are to create policies at a large scale, which have a ton of kind of predefined policy templates that are available with the classifiers and data classification methods that we talked about. So there's 3 different types of policy templates you can choose from. Predefined, which includes sensitive information types for different areas and defined policy rules. Now, these are the old policy templates, which we'll touch on. Then you have enhanced templates, which is very similar to the predefined templates. However, these include kind of standard trainable classifiers for their related rule types like healthcare or medical terms, and give you a little bit more granular control. And then finally, you have just a custom template, which is a blank canvas, and you can create customized rules, alerts, or actions with granular controls. So once you have your template selected and configured, you can begin testing it. And that really breaks down into 4 steps. You want to pick the scope of where your locations are that you want to cover. This may include email, OneDrive, or maybe a location like SharePoint. Once you've identified your scope, then you want to choose the type of template you wish to deploy. There may be only a select amount of data that you want to protect, requiring only a handful or maybe even 1 policy that you need to create. Or you could have many different use cases, and you want to be able to create a very granular approach for different departments, different labels, different sensitivity. And then once your policies are configured, you have the option to enable them immediately, which I wouldn't recommend, or simulation mode. And simulation mode is a little bit new. This came out earlier this year before there was a testing mode. Simulation, though, is giving you a little bit more visibility into what's going to happen before you actually enable this, which is great. So what this does is it runs through your policies, your templates, your actions, your conditions, and provides you an output of this is what it found, this is what it would have done to those situations. And you can validate if those are correct, if it's doing and finding the information correctly before you're actually enabling it within your organization. So it's giving you time to validate your settings are correct. And then finally, once you have validated your policies are correct, you can enable the protection policies, which will immediately begin running in your system based on your use cases. So let's go back to that project Obsidian where Alice found information in SharePoint and then put it into ChatGPT. How could Contoso prevented that? So there's a couple of different ways. Purview AI Hub would have allowed them to gain visibility into any generative AI use within the organization. And I'm not going to get too deep in the weeds in that. There will be a session next month that's going to touch more on AI Hub, generative AI solutions, and how you can help prevent accidental or intentional misuse of generative AI. Contoso could have leveraged information protection, which would have allowed them to apply sensitivity labels either to the Project Obsidian documents or to the actual SharePoint document library level itself, and only granting specific individual users access to that. They could have also created auto labeling policies that could have auto labeled it if John, uh, you know, forgot or accidentally did not classify the labels correctly. These auto labeling policies specifically for Project Obsidian could have corrected his mistake and auto labeled and applied the appropriate restriction policies. And then finally, Contoso could have also created an endpoint DLP policy that could have prevented user from pasting information into these generative AI apps. So there's more than one approach that had they have taken any of these, we could have stopped some of that data exfiltration from accidentally happening. Now, so we've talked about information protection and data loss prevention. Let's go into the third option as far as what we can do to help understand the user activity context around the data and how we can effectively use that with our data security strategy. So we need all three layers to, you know, for a defense in depth strategy. But again, it does not mean that you have to have all three of these initially. And you can have one or two. An example of this, using information protection and insider risk management together, you can understand the user intent around sensitive data to identify like the critical data risks within your organization. Another example is insider risk and data loss prevention. You could enable adaptive protection, which assigns appropriate policies based on the risk levels for the user. And we'll explain adaptive protection in just a second. So it doesn't matter where you embark on this journey, each layer makes your data security stronger. And so building out what's critical to you and looking for your long-term strategy towards how you want to be able to protect your users and data is critical. So let's take a look at the insider risk management solution and how it can help you manage insider risks intelligently. So how can you identify the critical risks in your organization? You need to know the context. So what IRM does is correlate the signals from first and third party systems to understand the intent better. For example, if a user submits a resignation letter to HR and tries to access sensitive or restrictive data that they normally should not access, it can use that context within their machine learning engine to better apply specific policies to that risky user. It can use sequence detection, which is a single activity, such as if the user is saving files to a USB, it might not prove that the user is good or bad or what their intent is. However, if the user is intentionally downgrading the sensitivity labels and then saving the files to the USB and then deleting the files afterwards where they were, that shows intent of exfiltrating data and potentially evading detection or trying to evade detection. And this is where IRM allows and leverages their machine learning models to tie in these connected activities together to help security teams identify these types of inconspicuous insider risks and to better understand the user intent. And then finally, anomaly detection. So it's often challenging to detect security incidents caused by low and slow insiders who essentially exfiltrate data slowly over a period of time. So they might only print one file a day or email one file every other day and so on, where they gradually exfiltrate sensitive data under the radar. With this cumulative exfiltration activities that are detected within the machine learning model, insider risk management can identify the low and slow patterns, such as user downloading an unusual volume of files over a period of time. And again, it can apply the appropriate permissions or protection policies in place. So often current manual methods are very tedious to uncover this. It can take multiple weeks or months to contain an insider risk incident. And now with adaptive protection, which is a newer capability of Microsoft Purview, it leverages machine learning to identify and mitigate most of these critical risks with the most effective protections and controls dynamically. So it can save security teams and organizations valuable time and ensuring that data is better secured. And since risk is dynamic, your protection policies should be as well. And it should adapt accordingly. Adaptive protection dynamically assigns appropriate DLP policies to users based on their risk level. It analyzes the machine learning models within IRM. It takes those policy controls and constantly adjusts it over time when a user's risk level changes and applies the appropriate DLP policies. So you can see both these users may be trajecting upwards towards risky behavior, which would apply block policies to prevent them from, intentionally or unintentionally exfiltrating data. But it may identify that user two over time was not doing anything malicious, so it's not applying high or very restrictive policies as their adaptive protection once again goes down. But for the risky user, where it's continuously seeing a trend upwards, it can constantly add additional rules of protection. So this is a little bit wordy, and I know I'm well over time, so I won't go too deep into this. This was a real life story that happened for someone that exfiltrated data. They were ultimately convicted in 2021 of doing so. Instead, I actually have a real life example of this from a couple of weeks ago. We had an individual come and say there are certain that they had an organization or an individual at the organization that left and took a company list with them. And they asked us to investigate. And a few weeks later, they had another user leave under kind of suspicious circumstances, and they were concerned that the user did the same. They ultimately found out that both those individuals that left went to the same competitor of theirs, and they had a very difficult time in terms of identifying what data was taken. Was their client contact list? Was any IP, intellectual property data or formulas taken with them? Ultimately, they didn't have insider risk management or protection policies in place to not just prevent that from happening, but really to be able to diagnose what data was actually exfiltrated or maliciously taken out of their organization when those users left. So these solutions offer the ability to basically, again, protect your data, but also protect against insider risks, which a lot of organizations don't always see until it's oftentimes too late. So again, information protection could have auto-labeled that intellectual property that was exfiltrated. Insider risk could have identified and applied adaptive protection policies to block those actions from taking place if a user did try to exfiltrate a company or a contact list before they left to a USB, or if they tried to print the data off or store it somewhere, publicly accessible. So insider risk management analytics also allows you to just evaluate potential insider risks. The reason why I wanted to show this is that you don't actually have to enable any policies to get started. If you have appropriate licensing, you can enable this today within your tenant. It may not have all of the connection types that you need to build a holistic list, but it can at least give you a glimpse of if there is potential data theft activities that are going on based on what it's seeing already. So it's something that you could take advantage of very quickly with just a few clicks without actually applying any policies. And then by visiting the Adaptive Protection tab within IRM, you can define and configure each risk level for the organization based on priority or your own appetite. Once these risk levels are configured, you can create DLP policies to either add to existing rules that you have or to apply certain restrictive policies based on the overall risk that you're seeing. So how do we get started? Based on everything that we just went through, we need to create a label taxonomy. And it sounds daunting to figure out what label scheme that you want, but we can certainly help you and provide guidance as far as what often is done for different organizations and industry types. You can start by defining that structure of your labels and the priority of the labels that you have. Then publishing those labels to the end users to allow them to either start manually labeling or to automatically label specific data based on the sensitivity. And then protect that data with your data loss prevention policies and use content and context to trigger different actions. And finally, identify the internal risks and how users are interacting with their data to enable adaptive protection and to automatically assign appropriate protections to high-risk users. So if you're interested in any of these, I have a short little slideshow once it populates of just kind of the different licensing. So just be aware that a lot of these are in the bundled plans already, such as Microsoft E3, E5, Business Premium. They also come in different add-ons as well. So you may already have the ability to use or enable some of these protections and start working with them today if you have any of these bundled options from Microsoft. So I appreciate everyone for attending. If you have questions on anything discussed, feel free to leave a question in chat. We'll stay around for the next 10 minutes or so, help answer what we can. I do apologize, I went terribly over. I did cut a lot of things out. It's a lot of information to go through, but happy to stick around and help answer anything. Remember, so we are doing another session in December. I believe it's the 16th. Mark might be able to validate if that's the correct time. We will be sending out invitations to anyone that's already signed up for either this one or last month's session, and that's going to be on Copilot and generative AI solutions like Gemini or ChatGPT or Jasper, and how you can actually prevent your sensitive data from accidentally going into those solutions and what you can do about that. And thank you, Mark. So 12/17. So December 17th is the session on Copilot and AI that we'll cover. We appreciate it, Adam. Thank you. Thanks for coming. No questions. Okay. Either answered everything, or I probably confused the audience. I hope it wasn't the latter.
Andrew, there was one question that came up here. It says, will the slides be available on our website?
Oh, yes. No, absolutely. So as soon as I can get all my content over to our sales and marketing department, they'll be able to post everything that we went through here. So you'll have that. I think last month's session, all that information was up there as well. That was more kind of high level, different capabilities that you can use from an information protection standpoint. And Adam asks, what percentage of existing customers are requesting Purview services? Honestly, quite a bit. It's a lot of organizations, once they get to a certain, I'll say, kind of security maturity level, is where we're starting to see these requests come in. So it's often not with like, we'll unfortunately call it like immature organizations. And by immature, I don't mean small businesses. I've seen, mom and pop shops that can be very mature, security aware, security mature. It's really once you've identified, hey, we're putting, certain contingencies in place, such as MFA and EDR and, appropriate firewall rules. To help protect our users, our identities, but it's not really protecting our data at the end of the day. And we need to go to the next level. And that's where we're seeing those, a lot of organizations come and find out what capabilities are there. There's more than just Purview from Microsoft. There's a lot of third-party solutions that do a good job as well. The reason why I'm passionate about like the Purview suite is that a ton of people have a lot of these licensing. So the feature sets, they're already technically paying for it if they've got an E3 or a business premium plan, that it just takes a little bit of time to develop and enable these policies and protection things. It can be done in a matter of a couple of days, or it can be very time intensive. It really depends on the level of kind of protections that you want to apply. And if you really start getting deep into very granular controls where you need specific controls and action items for very sensitive information that you want to keep close to the organization, or if you have like really stringent like compliance or regulatory obligations, oftentimes those are driving factors that we're seeing more and more that are requiring organizations to do some type of information protection or preventative actions. So Eric asks, what are those settings? You said we could turn on right away. Yeah, so there's Insider within. If you have access to Insider Risk Management, you can go in and just basically get started. There's a couple of Purview options if I can find it. So I should know this offhand. I think if you go to aka.ms/ I think it's Microsoft Purview. Nope. Microsoft had a short little URL that lets you go to kind of a get started page to help step you through. I'm not finding it. I'll make sure that I'll find it and I'll have it posted on our website. So the area that I'm thinking of, it's kind of built in and it's not obvious. So one of the things that that Microsoft's changing is they have an old Purview, kind of their classic window, and then they're moving to a modernized solution. So the modernized solution gives us the ability to automatically enable some of the just base information or analytics pages with insider risk management and with data loss prevention policies. It doesn't get you all the way there because there's certainly some time and effort, and it doesn't necessarily know like what compliance is or what you want to do for different certain with certain types of data and how you want to protect it. But it can at least give you the analytics to get started to potentially just see like what's going on in your organization. If you go to compliance.microsoft.com and you have administrative rights in that and you have licensing for Purview, you can go into insider risks and there'll be a little get started. There should be a get started box right at the top. And the first two options will give you the ability to turn on analytics, and it'll just look through like how data is moving within the organization across users and give you some feedbacks as to what it's seeing. But I'll find the link that I'm thinking of and I'll make sure that we post that. Okay. I appreciate it, everyone. If you do have any other follow-up questions that I missed or didn't get to, again, feel free to email sales@cyberadvisors.com. They're happy to, they'll track me down or track someone from my team down to be able to help answer or give you more information on any of this. Thanks all for attending.